if you have that latter, so if you have that former case extremely powerful without good biomechanics, you're always creating a lot of force that can be poorly applied, and as I can't stress that enough, it tends to engender a higher risk of injury, whether catastrophic injuries or long-term overuse type injuries. And it's at that stage, I did a little, I haven't got it here on a slide, but I asked a friend of mine again to look at the top, I think it was the top 15 British male 400 metre runners of all time. Only Mark Richardson was a 400 metre runner at 16 or 17. Everybody else was either in a different sport or more often than not in sort of a 1 or a 200. There are a couple of cases of people who have been further up in distance, 800 metres. But by and large, very few people look at, very few people who look at 400 metre running in their mid-teens successfully transfer that on to senior level. We've looked at the stats across the sprint board, so it's not necessarily that alone. But where we have people who have been good 400 metre runners, very few of them are actually running the event at all. And so I suspect that they have a much better kind of pathway through a division where they can start adding speed endurance, which is a fatiguing. You know, it's a fatiguing event. I mean, all athletes say my event's the hardest to train for, but 400 metres, 400 metre hurdles, it develops. It requires that you have pretty good speed, and it does require that you're able to sustain it under severe levels of fatigue. And again, that is another stressor where potentially poor biomechanics, poor postural control, any areas of weakness will be mangled out if you do not have these aspects in place. As I said, these are very much, we'll quickly run through the different, or a short summary of the different things you will be looking for maybe in those 3-4 subsequent subsequent additions that you can put into long-term sprint development I had on the slide there. It is very much, these are additions, so you can build these things on rather than substitute this, the plan for a 15 to 17-year-old for a 12 to 14-year-old. You just have more capacity, hopefully you have more skills that you can start building additional skills, workloads on, rather than necessarily changing everything. So I've probably hammered on quite a lot about fundamental skill development, coordination skills. That's all it is, the coordination to move. Jumps, throws. A lot of countries have successfully used like a multi-event approach. I know certainly in Russia, many of their successful athletes have come through a multidisciplinary approach. And all that is you have far many more skills that you're being exposed to, far many more motor patterns that you're asked to get your body used to handle. And again, I will know some multi-event coaches in Britain who would willingly adopt that model as what we did with athletes from 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And there have been in the past various initiatives to maybe replicate that. But because there is not really one overriding environment in which athletics takes place at that age, some takes place in school, some takes place in clubs. There is certainly not a talent identification process at that age in Britain. So there is no environment in which a multi-event approach could be utilised, although I do personally think it has merit for the very reasons that I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so. sprint-specific biomechanics, postural conditioning. Closely aligned to biomechanics. It's hard to have good biomechanics if your body is not well enough conditioned to hold itself. This is not about maximal strength, this is not about maximal explosiveness. This is purely the body's ability to be robust and absorb the forces that its limbs are creating. If I was looking at actual sprint work, I would keep it relatively short in duration. Things like in and outs, things where you might actually capitalise on the fact that you've tried to develop the ability of an athlete to have different skills in and out, so they're working slightly different tempos, they might work on slightly different movement patterns. And build-ups, so we're not looking at huge amounts of held extended speed. We're certainly not trying to make athletes of this age massively, massively powerful, because unless they have the biomechanics to utilise increased power levels, again, you come back to the same problem of a possible injury. Again, bodyweight plyometrics for speed strength, I think we talked about a second ago. Power and muscle conditioning. So again, I always put the same age groups on this, but I kind of think it is very much an ongoing building process, and you will get athletes at different rates of physical maturation. So it's much more a case of this is the path you need to follow. How quickly the path you follow is dependent upon the athlete, or the athletes you have, how fast they physically mature, and also how competent they become at putting base skills down first, biomechanics first, before wanting to get sucked in. I must get stronger, I must get more powerful. So a lot of dynamic stuff can start to come, but again, I would try to focus on acceleration work and keep the quality of the sprint work reasonably good. So reasonable recovery, so you can really be in control of what you're trying to do. And again, this will go back, or this will lead into, this will go into the final decision, like, does this athlete maybe look at a longer sprint event of 400 metres, or is the 1 and 2 the kind of area they can best utilise and further develop skills with? So for me, that is that last area. So it's nice that athletes are coming to me at the age where I am thinking this should be the position where we say, well, can you become much better over one lap than you are over the short sprint? The downside is often they don't have the base levels underneath them to make that a smooth transition as I would like, without having to take that additional amount of time and have that little bit more patience. Can I ask, what's the competitive structure for athletes at a young age in Finland?
They're running at 15, they're running 100 and 300 meters. And with hurdles, it's a little bit different kind of distances. I think it's 100 meters with boys. And
when do they start 400? When in a competition sense can they run 400 meters?
Under 19.
Under 19. It's usually, I mean, again, that was almost a slide I put in, was going around different countries. In Australia, I think, as soon as you're 14, you can run a lap. In Spain, although I'm not sure in Spain if they're stopping this now, they're running 330 meters. Yeah, it's an inventive way of looking at it. In Britain, it's slightly, there are the under 15 men can run 400 meters, but the girls cannot run. The girls will run 300 meters at under 17 level. Although obviously, if they're looking to compete in, I don't know, World Youth Championships or any of the European Youth an under-18 championship, then that is 400. But again, sort of how the competition structure is set in place is possibly an interesting tool that a nation can have and say, well, actually, how do we influence long-term speed development? Say it's very hard to me. It's very hard to and understandably so to say to children, well, actually, maybe you don't want to spend quite as much time competing and a little bit more time getting better at what you're doing, because competing is the outcome. It is the fun end of it. So the only other way you can potentially look at that is actually, well, do we structure the competition that it is more beneficial, more conducive, therefore, to long-term development?
We experimented on late 90s. We had under 17, I think for 8 years we had 400 meter.
Yeah.
But that didn't change anything. But either you have 300 or 400,
it made no difference, yeah.
It didn't make any difference.
I don't, it's possibly not the answer in itself, because again, if you go and over-compete just running 300s flat out, it's hard to know that all the technical stuff will be put underneath. It's possible, to me, it's possibly part of the answer, but not the answer. The answer myself would be patience. And patience is not something that I didn't have patience when I was as a teenager, so I can't really blame others for displaying the same characteristics, but with a coaching hat on, that's how I'd see it.
How are your top coaches? Are they working with the younger groups also? Are they coaching them?
Not so much, because the world-class plan and those coaches who are full-time coaches very much are employed, if they're employed by UK Athletics, very much employed to work with athletes who are on the UK Athletics world-class plan. And the parameters of the plan only really take place at under 18 level upwards. Having said that, there are, I know for example, I know Lloyd. Lloyd, for example, spent many years of his coaching development going into schools looking for talent. And he found someone called Christine, or that way. You know, people with some fundamental skills, some qualities that he could see developing. In the short term, with 2012 on the horizon, there's very little scope for that to be done again, I think, by the UKA professional staff. So it's very much a case of keeping an eye on who is doing what in the rankings, going to the English Schools Championships, going to the National Age Group Championships, and identifying talent and trying to work with them and their coaches. Again, Jodie Williams, the World Youth 100 metre gold medalist that Mike McFarlane was working with, that is a process that Mike used. So, although they're not paid to do it, but it helps if they are doing it, if that makes sense. I think with endurance events, it's probably slightly different, and endurance, you will find really good endurance groups working from under 13, well, under 12, all the way through the age groups. There's probably a lot more cohesion, if that's the right word, to a long-term endurance, or the ability of a coach to work all the way through the age groups.
How well the coaches that work with the 15-year-old or 17-year-old, how well the coaches master the sprint biomechanics? Do they understand them very well?
Poorly.
Poorly.
Biomechanics has not been, I'll say on my next presentation, I don't consider myself a particularly biomechanically oriented coach. I will do biomechanics, I will use it, I will have people feel my athletes and will look at making improvements. But again, as I say, my own progression into coaching would have come in that sort of vacuum between sort of school teachers not actually being in a position where good skill development was part of the PE programme. And now the advert of world-class funding. So there are the support services there to help coaches develop their skills. We have performance analysts. Obviously, you know Dr. Akisalo, who was sort of the first performance analyst biomechanicist that UK Athletics employed on a regular basis. So by now, at the top level, because you have to be on funding almost for that, that service to be available for you, it can be done. And obviously those coaches who are in a position where they can work with younger athletes can then start feeding the same skills in at a younger level. But because, as I say, for me there is still a little bit of a gap, and we don't get the skills to the children early enough, and we don't have a coaching structure that quite enables that to take place. That is where I know Kevin Tyler is focusing his energies. We must get a much more skill-based athletics environment as people come into, as they start athletics, rather than something we try to put in once they reach a certain level. If that makes sense. So that's the end of my first presentation. If there are any questions on that, please get back to me. When I talk about Martin Rooney, some of those aspects will again come back up. I mean, it's from a slightly different approach. He was an endurance-based athlete rather than a speed-based athlete with no skills. He just had no skills anyway. But, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Now is 2 minutes time.
Okay. I was wondering what happened to those teenagers who had made very high scores, good results. Did they try to improve and make progress, or what happened? They ignored because they didn't got any process?
I only looked in depth, being a 400 coach rather than a 100 and 200 coach. I only looked and tried to find out what happened to the under 15 men's all-time list. And quite a few of them would probably still be competing at an under 20 age group, but they wouldn't necessarily be the best. You know, they might be, rather than being someone, if you're coming in some of the top 5 or 6 of the British all-time list at 400 age 15, you're probably winning by quite a long way at that level, at that age. But by the time it came to under 17 or under 20, they'll probably still be in the sport. And I imagine that there's a case that those people who succeeded early were those people who were physically or had physically matured quite early. If they were undeveloped physically, but had good biomechanics that enabled them to run well and were still competing, you would expect them to go on and be equally good going under 20, under 23s and seniors. And you know, realistically, Mark Richardson and Catherine Merriott over the one lap events are probably the only 2 people who you could say that was the case for to date.
Any other? It's okay, we have a 5 minutes break now, and after that you can continue.
Take 2.
Okay, thank you. Pidetään 5 minuutin taukoa, silloin arvioittavissa kahvit, niin juodaan kahvit ja tullaan 5 minuutin päästä kuuntelemaan viime